Okay, welcome to the Objective 3 podcast on westward expansion. I can explain how the United States added the territories of Texas, California, and Oregon. So remember, by the end of this podcast, you should be able to answer any oral defense questions about how the United States gained those three territories. Now, we've talked quite a bit about some of the reasons why the United States wanted to expand west. We talked about manifest destiny. We talked about wanting to add these seaports in California or the farmlands in Oregon country. But we also talked about some of the difficulties with that, whether it be discussions about whether the new territory be slave state or free state, or not wanting to go to war with Mexico. That changes in 1844 when James K. Polk defeats Henry Clay in an election to become president. Most Americans voted for Polk because they believed that Polk was the candidate who favored westward expansion and was the one who would add those new territories to the United States. Now, almost immediately after becoming president, James K. Polk and the United States Congress annex or add Texas onto the United States. Mexico, of course, is outraged by this. Even though Texas had won a revolution and had been operating as its own country now for 9 years, the Mexican government still considered Texas to be a part of Mexico. So Mexico is very furious with this, and they feel like the United States is just taken over a piece of their land. James K. Polk offers them $30 million in exchange for California and the rest of the New Mexico territory, but Mexico refuses to sell any of this land and is still very upset with the United States. Now, knowing that Mexico is very upset by this, Polk makes a very smart move in 1845. Although he was elected because of his strong stance about gaining Oregon country and the New Mexico territories, he knows that he can't fight Britain and Mexico at the same time. Britain and the United States had been sharing Oregon country. So what Polk does is he works out a treaty with Britain that effectively cuts Oregon country in half, and everything north of the border between the existing border between the United States and what is now Canada, or at the time belonged to Great Britain, everything north of that line will become British territory, and everything south of that line will become owned by the United States. This frees up the United States government to worry about war with Mexico and to focus on gaining the territory in the southwestern part of the United States. With Mexico already very upset with him, knowing that he doesn't have to worry about Britain anymore and that they already have control of Texas and the Oregon Territory, James K. Polk orders General Zachary Taylor to set up forts across the Rio Grande River into what is very disputed territory between the United States and Mexico. Mexico claimed that the territory was theirs. Texas claimed that it had belonged to them when they joined the United States. When he does this, fighting breaks out and soldiers on both sides are killed. Polk goes back to Congress and he tells Congress that American blood has been spilled on American soil, and he urges Congress to declare war on Mexico. Now, even though most Americans had supported Polk in wanting to gain land to the west, many Americans did not like the war with Mexico. Much of the South was eager to fight, but the North thought that it was a plot to add more slave states to the Union because most of that new territory would be south of the Missouri Compromise line and would probably be turned into slave states. Most of the North didn't like it, even though most of the South did. There was also a political division. Most of the Democratic Party supported Polk and supported gaining more land through war with Mexico, and most of the Whig Party did not. Abraham Lincoln once gave a speech against the war that comes back to haunt him later when he talks about people having a right to stand up, and Lincoln's speech talked about people having the right to stand up and shed the shackles of tyranny and rise up in war against their oppressor, but he didn't support a war that was a war to try to gain more territory. And of course, when the South secedes from Union and starts a civil war, then people in the South say, "Ha ha ha! You said that people have a right to wage war against a government that is no longer working for them, and you also said that people didn't have a right to try to take over more land," which is what they felt like Lincoln and the Union were trying to do to them. So that speech comes back to haunt Lincoln later. Now, the United States wanted a very quick war, so they attack on several fronts. They send in a naval blockade to blockade Mexico City. They quickly invade the Texas territory and the New Mexico territory, which is mostly desert, and they're able to take control of that. By the time they get to California, they find out that California had already revolted against their Mexican governor who had left. California had declared themselves independent and declared themselves the Bear Flag Republic. The Californios there had. and the United States basically annexes California very quickly. California quickly joins the United States. And then the United States Army turns its focus towards Mexico City, where they run into some very strong resistance before finally capturing part of the city and to begin negotiating the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. In the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, Mexico agrees to cede or give up much of the California territory and all of the New Mexico territory to the United States. This becomes known as the Mexican Cession. The word cession meaning, of course, cede or give up. In return for this, the United States agrees to pay $15 million and to respect the rights of Spanish-speaking people in the New Mexico territory. Now, a few years later, in 1853, the United States pays $10 million to Mexico for what is a small strip of land in present-day Arizona and New Mexico. They do this because they're trying to complete a railroad, and there's heavy mountain ranges to the north that they were going to have a difficult time building the railway through. This completes the Transcontinental Railroad connecting the East Coast to the West Coast. This piece of land becomes known as the Gadsden Purchase, and with this, many feel as if Manifest Destiny had been fulfilled. And that will just about wrap up our Objective 3 podcast. Review the key vocabulary terms on your unit sheet. Review the I can statement. Ask yourself, can you explain how the United States added Texas? Can you explain how they added California? And can you explain how the United States added Oregon, the Oregon Territory? If you feel like you can answer those three questions and you can use the vocabulary terms, then I would say you're probably in pretty good shape. If not, might want to take some more time, go back through the podcast, and make sure you have answers to those questions.